Good day. Welcome to the 1,000 plus people who have registered to OUTA's webinar today, where we're going to highlight the plight of our municipalities. But more importantly, we want to also touch on solutions. It's extremely worrying situation and issue that we face in South Africa. And thus the topic of our conversation is around saving South Africa's municipalities. And to do so, we have two excellent panelists in discussion with me today. So let me start by introducing them. Firstly, we have the Auditor-General of South Africa, Mr. Thembekile Mokwetu, who is a social sciences graduate. He's also has a BCom to honors degree, and he's a qualified chartered accountant. Mr. Mokwetu has worked in the private sector before completing his articles at Deloitte, where he progressed to senior management. He went into Liberty and into Metropolitan Life. He returned to Deloitte as a director in the firm's forensic unit. And then he went on to become the Deputy Auditor General, and then the Auditor-General in December 2013. Mr. Mokwetu became he's been in this role now for 7 years, and his term comes to an end in November. So he's well certainly qualified for this position and role that he's fulfilled so well. And I must say, AG, here I must congratulate you on the vigor and the quality and the content of the information you've provided in your reports over the years, which have just got better and better every year. So well done, and thank you for that. Then secondly, we have Dr. Tracy Ledger. She has degrees in economics and agricultural economics, a PhD in anthropology. She's currently a senior researcher at PARI, the Public Affairs Research Institute. Dr. Ledger has undertaken extensive research around local government, focusing on the drivers of institutional performance, and more importantly, on the drivers of poor institutional performance. And here we must congratulate you, Dr. Ledger, and your team, and Dr. Buthelezi, CEO of PARI, and the entire team who does really sterling work in their research in public affairs arena. So thanks again to both of you for accepting our invitation to be panelists in what is deemed by millions of South Africans as a serious and burning issue. And that being the continuous decay of local government in South Africa. These are our metros and our municipalities, the very places that we are born, the places where we live, we work, we entertain, we invest in properties, we build our businesses, and it's where we retire and eventually are buried in. And so they're very important places for us as residents, not just ratepayers, but everyone who resides in the space of local government. And time permitting, we'll throw in some questions, so put your questions to us in the chat box. With our viewers, we'd like to try and get to a few of those, but we're going to start with the Auditor-General, who recently released his report on local government audit outcomes for the 2018-2019 financial year, and titled, Not Much to Go Around, Yet Not the Right Hands at the Till. And that is in itself a very telling name for the report. But before we go to you, Mr. Mokwetu, I've taken the liberty of extracting a few pertinent points and highlights from your recent report, which I'll go through on a couple of slides, just to set the scene and the gravity of the situation. So I just want to cross to the slideshow quickly, and we can discuss that. I'm not sure if you can see that. It should be on the screen. I just want to make it larger. I hope it's there, but this is the topic of our discussion today. That is the report that you put out. And you paint a very disturbing story in your executive summary, Auditor-General, about most municipalities being crippled by debt, by being unable to pay for water, electricity, inaccurate and lackluster revenue collection, expenditure that is unauthorized, irregular, fruitless and wasteful, and a high dependence on grants and assistance from national government. On average, almost 60% of the revenue shown will never find its way into the bank accounts of municipalities. Extremely worrying statement, that. And you go on to say the outcome of which is a downward spiral into a financial cul-de-sac that many of the local municipalities and districts have already reached across the country. Only 8% of municipalities received a clean audit. And if we look at the last 5 years of the qualified or adverse or disclaimer audits or outstanding audits, This has now climbed up to 60% from 40% 5 years ago, getting worse every year. We need to see more of the green stuff. This is the unqualified audits. And as you said, 8% are clean. In the business world, you know, the green part of this graph covers 90% of the space. Generally 10% or less are in the unqualified or in the qualified space. So this is a very worrying situation, and it's not getting any better. Another really worrying statement was this 1.3 billion rand paid to financial consultants. So we're bringing in financial people to help us do these financials, of which 59% of those reports prepared by the financial consultants contained material misstatements. So not only are we bringing in experts to help us do the financials, we're not even picking up how problematic those are. And if you just look at the last 5 years on irregular expenditure, doubling from just under 15 billion 5 years ago to over 32 billion rand in irregular expenditure. Fruitless and wasteful expenditure also doubled, over 3 billion rand now over the last 5 years. It's doubled, and unauthorized expenditure still very, very high, tracking at just under 16 billion rand. So extremely concerning situation that we find ourselves in, and I would like to just remove that slideshow now so that we can get on with the discussion. Is the slideshow gone? I hope so. Thanks very much. So over to you, Mr. Mkwetu. I think the first matter that I'd like us to discuss is, you know, we know there's no silver bullet or one single matter that gives rise to the dire state of our municipalities. And not to forget the decline in larger cities as well as our metros. And in your experience as the AG, what are the main root causes of the problems? Maybe focus on the top 3 or 4 or so that give rise to the biggest impact in the decline of local government in the space. And let's also remember there are a lot of good municipalities. You point that out in your report, which shows that it can be done. So looking forward to hearing what you've got to say about
that. Thank you very much, Wayne. And once again, thank you for inviting us to this webinar. We also appreciate the presence of many that have joined us today. Let me start at the very basics, Wayne, and start looking at this set of audit outcomes from our point of view as an audit office. To start with, when we go into any of these municipalities, including national and provincial departments, we are often arriving at these institutions with a view to testifying on the representations that are made by management of the entities. And I think, as you have correctly said, it applies not only in the public sector, but it also applies in the private sector. Because management, having been entrusted with the resources, with the finances of these institutions, are also required to report on them in the way of making representations about what they did with the money in order for them to justify the things that they are disclosing in the financial statements. So our very basic document that we look at when we do any one of these audits is the set of financial statements that contain the representations that are made by management. And really our job as an audit office is to attest or to testify either to the validity, the accuracy, or the completeness of the information that management purports to be relevant information in order for those that make decisions to be able to rely on it. Mm-hmm. So as we walk into any audit environment, and in answer to your question, we first look for what is the basic system that will assist this organization to be able to report to its stakeholders as accurately as possible. So the first thing that we look at is the basic systems. Do they have a system in place inside the institution that enables those that originate transactions not to be the same people that authorize them. So that's the one part that we look at.
Yeah.
Because it's important to separate those functions, because if anybody places an order for the repairing of a community center, someone else needs to be the one who authorizes it. So we look at the basic systems, and in most instances we find these systems in many municipalities to be chaotic, whereby the actual people that were meant to be occupying these positions are not in these positions. And in some instances, those that occupy these positions do not follow the systems that have been developed in those municipalities for monies to be properly protected. So that's the first part. The second part, which has stood out for us as one of the major root causes, is the glaring absence of skilled persons. Skilled persons, not only in terms of people who understand where must I put in a debit versus another credit, but also in the areas of infrastructure delivery. You find that there is a shortage of people who follow the project management routines. So that at various intervals in the process of implementing a particular project, there is or there are people whose responsibility is to confirm, to verify, and to assist the institution to know that what they are paying for is what has been delivered in accordance with specifications. So the second point, as I say, in addition to a basic system for collecting this information, for applying financial management rules is not in place, but it's also compounded by the lack of skilled persons. Because it will be possible for somebody in a finance department to make a payment, for example, of a 20 million bill, if they didn't get confirmation from the people in the field as to whether that which they are paying for has been fully delivered, it might mean that the municipality makes payments for things that they have not really received value for. So if I look at the third part of what is the main root cause, it's also the layer of leadership oversight within a number of municipalities. And of course, the role of leadership oversight draws from the fact that whenever these budgets are agreed and secured, the councils of these municipalities are required to be the ones that make their representations on behalf of the citizens through the financial statements to confirm that indeed the expenditures that are purported to have been incurred, including the assets that have been secured, are indeed what they, as the leadership, have authorized, and that they are signing up to the validity of those transactions. So we've also found that this level of rigor at the level of leadership oversight has been largely a weakness and has been missing. And the reason for it, among others, that we detected is also to do with the fact that there are all sorts of people who are interested in the outcomes of the adjudication of various contracts. And of course, those things, they trigger conflicts of interest in many institutions. So if leadership oversight is not strong, is not in place, you end up with people that are conflicted in respect to the adjudication and allocation of contracts. And I think the overall view that we take on this, Wayne, is that when you don't have a proper basic system of accountability in place, when you don't have skilled personnel carrying out these transactions, and your leadership oversight is not strong in terms of mitigating the risk of financial loss, and you also do not have proper performance systems in place to manage the performance of your respective workers in various areas. And if you are also in an environment where consequences for not doing the right thing are not in place, you then become a fertile environment for all sorts of abuse. And for us, that is really the core of the root causes.
Great. Thank you very much, Kimi. I think that's very interesting. Certainly, there's no lack of shortage of oversight. We have provincial oversight. We have a number of organizations that play in the space of trying to uplift or assisting with the upliftment and leadership within local government. And yet we have this dire situation, this continuous decline, and year after year you bring out these reports and we say it certainly shouldn't get worse than this, and yet it does, and that is an extremely serious concern. And I think we can see it. The people in towns and cities are expressing their frustration, and it's not getting any better. So I think let's cross now to Dr. Tracy Ledger from PARI. Based on the research, and you've done some fantastic research at PARI, Tracy, over the last 5 years specifically, what do you believe the main factors in contributing to the current state of local government is?
Thanks, everyone. I think that building on from what the AG was saying, but focusing perhaps on some of the more structural issues that are contributing to that. So there is a huge amount of money, billions and billions of rands, that is spent every year in government to support local government. I mean, just one of those examples is more than R1 billion on consultants to prepare annual financial statements. But a lot of those support programs are not dealing adequately with the underlying structural reasons for why we're in that position. And the AG touched on one of those issues in the preparation of the annual financial statement. So we've been in municipalities that consistently get a disclaimer audit outcome. And if you ask to see their document management system, you will literally find yourself in a giant room in the basement that's full of paper. It's not filed, it's not whatever. So when the consultants arrive, which is normally only a couple of months before the year end, they face an almost impossible task. But every year we keep doing the same thing. We keep spending billions of rands on consultants to try and draw up financial statements when the real problem is exactly as the AG said, it's basic administration and filing. So we need to really improve our diagnostic capacity of what the real problems are in local government instead of simply trying to address the surface areas. I think that we acknowledge that there is a problem with our intergovernmental relations framework in terms of enforcing compliance. So we have this framework which is based on 3 cooperative spheres of government, all working together to further the aims of the Constitution, in which the rights of South Africans are premier. But the problem in that framework is what happens when people are not cooperating, when people are not acting in a cooperative fashion. And it turns out that in the intergovernmental relations framework, there's actually very few means of enforcement. And one of the best examples, coming back to capacity again, are the National Treasury regulations on minimum competencies for Section 57 managers. And our research has shown quite clearly that when you have good, competent people in these key positions, you get better operational and governance outcomes. National Treasury issued regulations in this regard in 2007, and all of those people are on 5-year contracts, and yet fewer than half of the municipalities comply, and there does not appear to be a mechanism within the intergovernmental relations framework to deal with it. And then I think that the final issue, and this is something that we've been flagging more and more, is that there really is a serious underlying structural issue with the local government revenue framework, which is based on some very critical assumptions about the percentage of operating expenditure that municipalities could raise from their own revenue. Essentially, 72% of all municipal operating expenditure is supposed to come from rates and taxes and basic services, electricity and water. And the AG has flagged that there's a very serious problem with this. And what we've seen is that we've had very high increases in these service charges, well above the rates of inflation, especially in terms of electricity, and a significant percentage of households simply cannot afford to pay. Municipalities also in many cases can't use electricity disconnection to enforce the payment of these accounts because Eskom directly supplies more than 50% of South African households. So what do we have? We have a situation where, as at the end of March, which is before the impact of coronavirus, we have outstanding municipal debtors of 180 billion rand, 132 billion rand of that in respect of households, and more than 80% of that outstanding for more than 90 days. And there's been a lot of attention focused on how much money is owed in terms of electricity, but there is a much more money owed in terms of rates and taxes and water. And the point is that critical municipal services like infrastructure maintenance are meant to be paid for out of these revenue flows. So we need to critically rethink our local government fiscal framework. We clearly don't have enough revenue in the system to pay for everything, which is why we need to make sure that the money we do have is spent more efficiently and more effectively. But we need to rethink what it is that local government is expected to do with the money that it does have, and adjust accordingly, we think.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Tracy. I think quite clearly, if we go back a decade, and maybe even less, one sees that we have been able to keep municipalities, most of them some years ago, in the black, make sure that they are functioning. And as Mr. Mkwetu points out in his reports, the fact that we have a number of municipalities that do well, it shows that the systems are there. You speak of the oversights and intergovernmental framework, Tracy, it's there. So there shouldn't be, we've got all the checks and balances. There is expertise in the country. There are systems, and there's proof of municipalities doing it very well. So why is it that we have not a few, but the bulk of our municipalities into this in this dire state? Very, very sad. But to you, Auditor-General, let's get into the subject of accountability. For far too often, we see these grave transgressions that give rise to billions of rands lost in the system. And unfortunately, as the poorest of the poor suffer the most, because the infrastructure upgrading and development that is required in various areas of our municipalities just goes undone, and the repairs and maintenance, we see far too little money spent on maintenance and repairs. And when it is spent, the work that's done is just not up to standard. And in your latest report, you speak of millions of rands even paid for services and goods that were never delivered. And yet we see very few cases of municipal managers, CFOs and others in authority being tried and charged or made to pay back the lost funds. More than anything else, AG, I think the public want to see these perpetrators being held to account. And given your new powers that were extended to you in your office, we're able to go after the culprits now. You're able to do that for those who are responsible for these material irregularities. And you reflect on 3 cases in your report in the city of Tshwane and another municipality in the Northern Cape and in the Northwest. So what can we expect from the AG's office in the coming months when it comes to holding people to account in this regard?
Thanks, Wayne, for picking up those specific examples. You will recall that the amendment to the Public Audit Act was signed into law and became operational from 1 April 2019. As it was approved, we then had to grapple with the reality that we must have proper, sound regulations that are going to follow the implementation of this act. Because it has huge implications, if you look at the Audit Office mandate, it stretches from one publicly funded institution in local government to another in national and provincial sphere of government, which means that in order for one to properly implement the spirit and the letter of this amendment, we needed as an audit office to gear up, make sure that we reorientate a lot of our frontline staff who are on these audits with a view to them understanding at a practical level, how does a material irregularity look like? And I think that's an important point that we as an office had to invest a bit of time in. Because the kind of stuff that we normally report as required in the PFMA, and you cast your mind back to the issues that we often raise deficiencies like irregular expenditure, fruitless and wasteful, unauthorized, and all of that. Mm-hmm. Now, those are the generic type of things that can go wrong, generally speaking, because someone spends money without following the regulations governing proper procurement of goods and services. But in terms of this amendment, it has clearly defined a material irregularity in a way that is no different to how that particular definition is applied in the private sector. You will often hear in the private sector about reportable irregularities. These are irregularities that auditors in the private sector are required to report, for example, to the Independent Regulatory Board of Auditors. So that's the one side. It's been there for many, many years. But in our case, we introduced it in order for us to identify a material irregularity as we do the audit and hand it over to an accounting officer. And I'll explain why the accounting officer in a minute. If you look at the Municipal Finance Management Act, as well as you look at the PFMA, the people who have got the highest level of administrative responsibility in each of these municipalities is an accounting officer, because the law requires them to put in place a system of risk management, a system of internal controls that will narrow the opportunity for anybody to abuse the public resources. So what we're saying then in terms of this amendment is that one of the most glaring issues that can happen in an institution is when somebody makes a payment without requesting, without getting the requisite value for it. So if you make a 20 million payment weighing towards whatever it is that you purport to be what you've procured, and the auditors at the first instance ask for evidence of the particular disbursement. If you can't show for it and you can't show any evidence of it, then the auditors, based on the knowledge of other areas of work that they are doing in the audit, can immediately call that a possible material irregularity.
Right.
Now, the accounting officer has got 20 working days from notification, and this notification is in writing. It happens as we are doing the audit. We don't wait until we have signed off on the audit. As we are doing the audit, we say, accounting officer, we have picked up in your accounting records a payment of 20 million rands. All the inquiries that we have made do not give us any satisfactory response as audit evidence. Can you please, as an accounting officer, take it upon yourself within the next 20 days to provide us a explanation of this transaction? And if you are not able to explain it, let's say, then that particular item will find its way in your audit report as a material irregularity. Now, the Public Audit Act has provided us 3 steps. The first step is to report on it if it has not been sustainably resolved. Secondly, if it has not been resolved within a prescribed period, you then elevate it into a binding remedial action. So that is the next set of powers that the Public Audit Act has given us, which we didn't have before. And as you know, the remedial actions of a Chapter 9 institution were a subject of a review process within the highest court in the land. And because of those complications, we then had to invest in your proper administrative justice processes to make sure that the process doesn't get hit at the beginning when people complain that they were never given the second chance or they were never given a chance to explain their side of the story. So what we've been doing over the last couple of months has been to tighten that part of the powers, which ultimately, if you didn't respond per the prescribed period in terms of the remedial action, then the last part of the phase of these powers is for the audit office to issue a certificate of debt in the name of an accounting officer or accounting authority that neglected to put in place those very minimum preventative controls. Preventative controls like how do you prevent spending 20 million to someone who may never come with that which you are buying from them. So the real essence of this is that what you've seen in our report now, if nothing has been done sustainably by the accounting officers, by the time we report on the next phase of the audit, you will then see which parts of these findings have escalated to become a certificate of debt, and which ones are being battled with in the context of trying to fix them by the accounting officer. So these powers, in essence, what they are doing, they are actually trying to mitigate this long-winded process of dealing with audit findings and actually giving it a prescribed period of time so that we don't run around with institutions that have got disclaimers for the past 10 years when the opportunity to fix the findings at a source was never exercised. And that's why we are saying that either we give you more time to fix the deficiency, which leads to financial losses, or we ask you to make good to the public purse that which has been quantified as a loss.
In their personal capacity?
Yeah.
Great.
We do not want to see...
Yeah, sorry?
I was saying we do not want to see a debit into the books of the entity that you are presiding over, which has got to do with a lot about your own performance, because those debits are only set aside for expenditures towards meeting the interests of the citizens, not to pay for being sloppy. Absolutely.
Well, that's great. I think we're excited to see that those powers are there. We want to now see them enacted and now to see people being held accountable. There's nothing worse than seeing the waste and seeing these municipalities paying over for services and we're just not getting the return, the bang for buck, so to speak. And we need that. Accountability is something that's been missing a lot, and one gets the sense that the authorities, I think you highlighted in your report as well in the beginning of the talk, this lack of leadership. Leadership is about taking a firm stance against those who transgress and break the rules and hold people to account. And if we don't have leadership doing that, and the next layer of leadership at provincial level not doing anything and looking away all the time and making excuses for the types of problems that happen, what worries us, as well as when we see the public in desperation going to court, the court ruling in favor of the citizens, as we saw in Makana, and yet we see no action from the province and the oversight entities actually engaging with the citizens, engaging with the unemployed movements and all the people in that town to find out what is going on. Instead, we see them defending the councils and trying to keep them in those positions of which they've completely failed at. And the citizens, the residents of these towns reach their tether. They get so frustrated with this having to take government to court to do its job. To you, Dr. Ledger, in your opinion, what are some of the actions we need to introduce to improve accountability, and why do you say so?
Look, I mean, I think that the change to the Public Audit Act is definitely a step in the right direction. It makes it quite clear what the responsibilities of accounting officers are and holds them to account. I think that is a big step in the right direction. Our research, we've done quite a lot of research on Section 139 interventions over the last couple of years. That's potentially a very powerful tool to enforce compliance with governance, with good financial management, and with service delivery in local government. And it's a very comprehensive part of the Constitution. Section 139(1) deals with the failure to deliver basic services to a certain standard. Section 139(4) deals with the failure to pass a budget, and Section 139(5) deals with serious financial problems within a municipality, including this issue of long-term disclaimer audits. So what we have is actually this wonderful constitutional tool which anticipated that there might be serious problems in local municipalities, either operational or financial. It set out a clear approach for identifying them. It set out a clear method for dealing with these issues. The Municipal Financial Management Act has a long list of interventions that can be used to address these issues, including setting aside bad contracts, restructuring the municipality. But the problem is that the statute has never been implemented actually in the way that it should have been. Our research showed that there are many municipalities in this country that have crossed the threshold for Section 139(5) intervention many years ago, and yet there has never been an intervention, or there has been an intervention that's not structured in line with the Constitution. And this represents a failure of multiple parties. It represents a failure of provincial oversight. It reflects a failure of national COGTA oversight. It reflects a failure of national Treasury oversight. It reflects a lack of oversight of the National Council of Provinces. So I think we've got a real problem in that we have a lot of regulation. In fact, it's a good argument to make. Local government's probably over-regulated, but we are extremely poor at implementing and taking account of that regulation. So we end up in a situation where citizens are going to court to enforce these things. Yes, on the one hand, the court can rule in your favor, but the courts don't always make good judgments. And it's really important that the state takes the leadership here and enforces the intergovernmental relations framework, which was meant to deal with exactly these issues.
Yeah, I guess that's. Yeah. Sorry, you want to say something else, Tracy?
I just wanted to raise the ways in which citizens can get more involved, but we've got that down for something to talk about.
We'll come to that now. So we've got all these great laws and regulations, the Constitution's strong. And clearly there is this lack of application. We go well beyond the thresholds, as you say, of the 139 interventions that are required, and yet nothing happens. And this is extremely frustrating for so many people. And when there is an attempt to put municipalities under administration, we've seen, I mean, Mfuleni is one of them, it's just undergone this 3, 4, 5, 6 times and nothing happens. It just continues to get into a bigger hole. So really, really worrying stuff at this failure of oversight and the lack of implementation. AG, as we search for solutions to these broken municipalities, as we want to try and get to, how do we find solutions? I guess the easiest way to ask this question is if you were appointed as a municipal manager, average size municipality, one of those that are steeped in these common problems that you refer to in your reports, a big city, maybe one that you can clearly see is problematic. And if you could assume that you remove the political interference, because we know that is part of the problem. There's so much political interference, and that's a discussion on its own. Where do you start? What do you do to start fixing a broken municipality?
If you look at a municipality, Wayne, it's as I said earlier on, the municipal manager is the person that takes ownership in respect to putting into reality the wishes of the citizenry of that particular municipality.
Mm-hmm.
And this happens after the council has presided over budgeting processes and all manner of things that need to happen in that particular town. And if I look at it, if I were in this position as a municipal manager, certainly the first opportunity to clear the path with the council will be my first port of call, where I go to council as an accounting officer, and I present to council the project execution plan, for example, that will preoccupy the municipality, which will require the support, the involvement of council, but certainly not the interference of individual council members. And I think it would be one of the key things that municipalities must think about, where the accounting officer, because of the risks associated with not meeting the needs of the citizens, the best people to go place in front of your plans in terms of how you propose the projects that have been agreed ought to be implemented, needs to be presented to council with a request to council that it is not for them to decide which entity must be given which part of the contracts, because the people in administration have signed up their names and they are going to make sure that all of these plans are executed in accordance with the requirements of the law, among others. So I think for me, that will be the first thing that I will make sure I put in place, so that it it restores the authority of that particular council chamber. Because the council chamber can't turn around afterwards and say, no, but we have no idea about how all of these things were planned to be done, and we were not involved in supply chain. I mean, there are many ways to get involved in supply chain, for example. Sometimes you don't have to be physically present at an adjudication meeting for you to be pronounced as having been involved. You can do it by in all sorts of other ways that are not physically verifiable. So I think that would be the first point. But the second point I would also want to get council to sign up to is the development of a preventative controls framework that I, as a municipal manager, will assign to all the Section 57 managers and say that if you are a human resource manager, here are the institutional guidelines and policies that govern the sourcing of employees for various activities of the municipality, and you shall operate within this preventative control framework. And I think if one does that, not only with, let's say, a human resource manager, but does it with a chief operations officer, if there's one in a municipality, or any one of those senior managers, because what you are doing, you are saying to them, should there be anything to do with finances being lost, then they probably would have slipped through your preventative controls. So let's make sure that all of us sign up to these preventative controls, which may be operational in nature. But there's another category of preventative controls, which will be the preserve of council. What are these? One of them, for example, will be council, according to the statutes, is required to receive quarterly reports on progress on various activities of the municipality. Now, council, as part of the overall governance of the institution, ought to insist to the accounting officer that those quarterly reports shall be tabled and that there will be a mechanism to process them so that even council, before they get to a financial year, on a quarter-by-quarter basis, because all the councillors, most of them, in fact, are assigned certain projects. Others are infrastructure heads, others are community development heads. But if I present as an accounting officer a year-to-date expenditure, for argument's sake, of 10 million on a particular project, that councillor does not have to be schooled in the disciplines of finance and accounting for them to know that what they have physically inspected in a particular village is unlikely to be 10 million based on what has been delivered. And I think some of those are the basic disciplines and the basic instruments that do not necessarily talk to the type of technical skills that auditors and accountants have. It's about how are the connecting points between administration as well as those that are charged with oversight of the institution in order to make sure that there's proper implementation of projects and there's proper accountability. Because if I'm sitting as a municipal manager in that municipality and I know that there's a 2 million rand balance in the bank account, but I've never seen a bank reconciliation attesting to that balance, attesting to the various activities that have happened in the bank account, then I'm not properly positioned to prevent outside people who might hack into our systems, make payments via an electronic funds transfer, and we probably discover it when we are being audited because we do not have those day-to-day preventative control disciplines, the ones that have made many private sector institutions to be 90% green in most instances. It's not because it's magic in the private sector. It's because they know that something called a clean audit is the basic standard. It's not something to aspire to. Why would you aspire to doing the right stuff when you are employed in this institution with a certificate of a chartered accountant? Surely that should be your starting point. You can only aspire to bigger things that are thrown at us by COVID. But as far as where's this document to substantiate this transaction, that shouldn't be a nightmare. Otherwise, if you use it as a nightmare as it is now, then you are not going to avoid calling consultants to come and charge you a lot of money. Yeah, interesting. Absolutely. I like the way you put that. This is
in business, it's a non-negotiable. If you don't get the green audit, you lose your job. You've got work to do, and we're not seeing a lot of that. AG, just a question from Skulk Schultz. How much influence does the council member have over the municipal manager or the chief whip or other executives? Because what I heard in your response, which is interesting, you as the municipal manager, get in there and get the council to understand what their role is, get them to buy into what has to be done to get the city or the town back on track, the municipality serving its citizens, and get them to play their part far more meaningfully than what is happening at the moment. Is that right?
No, absolutely. I mean, if you look at councillors are all elected by us.
Yeah.
So they will obviously assume a higher level of authority than those people that present themselves with their CVs.
Okay.
That's my starting point.
So they have quite a lot
to interrogate the strength.
Sorry, carry on. I'm just saying they have a lot of influence. Councillors. Yeah.
Oh, certainly, but their strengths differ depending on where they are, who are the council members and all of that. But generally, if one looks at the line of accountability, the buck must stop with them. They are the government of that town.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks for that, AG. I guess starting with you, Tracy, in this question, I'll come back to you, AG, for your insights as well. How do we get municipal leadership to meaningfully engage with civil society? Because if you look at the three spheres of local government, you have the politicians or the politics, you have the administration, and then you have community. And it's like a three-legged table. They've got to work together, the symbiotic relationship, working together well. It works. You get these municipalities working for the communities who they're supposed to serve. But one gets a sense so often that the politicians have hijacked the administration and pretty much forgotten about the community, the very people they serve, the very people who pay their salaries. And I know we have the public engagement processes, but very often when we engage with society in these municipalities, they are oblivious to what they should be doing. So there's something to be said about the public need to become more active as citizens. We know that, but it's also very difficult to engage when it's almost hidden under the carpet. These public engagement sessions need to be meaningful. I've seen municipalities say, well, we put out the notice and no one came, and they think they've ticked the box, but yet that's not the issue. If nobody comes, then you're doing something wrong with encouraging and enticing citizens to become part of the solutions to the city. So how do we see municipalities bring civil society into this space so that we can work together and have more insight and oversight over municipalities?
I think it's currently quite a problematic relationship on many levels. So let me touch on a number of issues. I think the first thing is that in public engagements, there really is a tendency within local government, I'm not entirely sure why, not really to bring people along on the journey and the trade-off that need to be made in a local municipality. So a lot of the IDP process is simply about communities saying, we want this long list of things, and kind of getting a response of, oh, okay, when the people in the municipality know very well either that the things that people want, like a clinic or housing, is actually not within the control of the local municipality, or they know very well that there is no budget for all of those things. But there seems to be a real reluctance to take communities into their confidence and say, listen, this is the budget that we have. We know that in this ward, you would like to have a community center, but actually what you can't see is that the water infrastructure desperately needs to be repaired, or else in 2 years' time, nobody will have water here. So there's a real lack of taking people into confidence in terms of saying, these are the trade-offs we have to make. This is the money that we really have. These are the real choices we can. So what we have is we create these false sets of expectations in communities about what is actually going to happen. And then everyone's fed up when things don't happen. So I think we need to have a much more equitable relationship. People in communities are not idiots. You know, it doesn't matter, you know, where that community is, or there seems to be an assumption that communities won't understand these issues, but nobody really tries to engage with citizens on these issues. So I think that's an important thing. I think the other thing is that every single one of us should go and read Chapter 4 of the Municipal Systems Act, which actually gives an enormous amount of input to communities in everything that gets done. It says there that communities have to be consulted before the IDP is finalized. It says that communities have to be consulted before the budget is finalized. It says that communities have got the right to attend almost every single council meeting. The problem, of course, is that most people are not aware of these extensive rights that they have. And also, a lot of these rights have sort of been fobbed off via ward councillors and ward committees, which are not always the best way to do things. So there certainly is a lot of room for a more proactive relationship on the part of communities. But also, I think, for those municipalities that really are trying to do their best, and there are many municipalities in that position, to take communities into their confidence as real partners in the decision-making process around what happens in the municipality. And as communities, as people who live in municipalities, we also need to insist on our rights. We can't make them real unless we go out there and take them.
Yeah, I guess so. And the problem is, as we see, and it's just so sad that citizens are seen as the enemy when they start to want to inquire, when they start to force their way into being participative in the processes. And I mean, OUTA gets this quite often from the municipalities, thinking that we're the enemy, and we have to try and remind them that actually we're all on the same side here. You know, we all want no corruption. We want no wasteful expenditure. We want the money to flow to where it should go to fix the government, local, be it national, wherever. So why are we the enemy if we're asking for our tax money and our rates to be spent wisely? Can we not just engage? Can we not ask the questions? And we have all these rights, and yet you see the barriers. As many barriers as possible are put up to make life difficult for citizens. And David Makema asks the question as well. You know, he states here that given this disturbing reports from the AG year after year, I mean, his view is that can we really claim that we have a local government? And what options do we have as citizens? And David, the answers to that are, I think we've got to, as citizens, now start to unpack and understand and start sharing common practice. You've seen municipalities, Harry Smith, doing the same thing. People are getting involved and exercising their rights. And you have, as Tracy says, a lot of rights. And we just now got to start exercising them, sharing them, have best practice, and not go the routes. And I think this is what's unfolding, AG, and I'd like to ask you a question here on this, because it comes out in your report with the money, the outstanding debt from citizens. The municipalities will blame the citizens for not paying, but the citizens are starting what seems to be these rolling tax revolts, and one doesn't want to get into that space because nobody wins. And yet citizens are having to repair their own streets and do their own repairs in towns and try and claim back money from municipalities who are broke. So what are the options for citizens? How do we get government to sit up more and start taking notice of the role that citizens have in this space? AG?
The many years of local government institutions having been in place since at least the early 2000s has triggered levels of mistrust. There are many people who will be part of organized groupings that used to work in some of these local government structures. Others were tossed out of the institution for various reasons, or others never made it to their aspiration to become representatives in local government and all of that. So we've got a very complicated trust issue, which I think could possibly be the starting point, you know, and begin to think about what are the best mechanisms to build trust with the respective communities. And I'm of the view that a lot of this has been placed in some of the legal or legislative instruments that Tracy referred to, the Municipal Systems Act, among others, and all of that. which provide for the opportunity for these conversations to happen. But what we often find, Wayne, is a situation where whenever conversations happen, they are normally in response to some difficulty that needs to be sorted out for now so that we can continue to breathe. And I think the commitment to engage communities must not necessarily be when water doesn't flow through the taps, but it's also going to be about, you know, that issue about municipalities having to submit their financial statements and annual reports by the 31st of January, after which date all of the municipalities that have done that, their documents become public documents. In all our respective towns, as we have said, many people perform their economic activities in all of these towns in South Africa, both rural and urban. Many people work, live, and have retired in many of these towns. And surely there must be a group of people that can make sense of what do these financial statements mean for our town as a starting point. You know, you don't have to have thousands of those communities mobilized around trying to understand exactly what are the councillors telling us. We can get it ourselves from their reports that they've issued publicly as required by law, and begin to study them and begin to ask the kind of questions that would have arisen at the integrated development plan meeting, where if a council had committed to a particular project for this particular year, some of the things that those people who understand how to read financial statements, among others, will be on the lookout for those things. And to begin to make sure that there's a structured conversation coming from those that are outside of the municipality, approaching the municipality to say, can you please unpack the representations that you have made in these reports insofar as our town is concerned. And I think it'll start from somewhere, because it's not a rumor, it's a report that has been attested independently and it has been put into the public space, but we never use these reports. I'll give an example of why I insist on this, Wayne. You know, in local government, if you look at all of the infrastructure assets across the country, they are way in excess of 300 billion assets that appear in all those financial statements combined. If you add up all of those financial statements combined, you'll find that there are huge assets that are sitting in many of those balance sheets. And if I live in Queenstown, I ought to know, as a person living there, who among the people employed in this municipality take ownership of making sure that these assets continue to operate. These assets are proactively maintained so that we don't sit with weeks and months of no water flowing through the systems, because we do have these assets, but the kind of people that we have employed are nowhere near appreciating a particular asset when it's about to go out of service in terms of its life cycle. And I think these are some of the basic things. It's not necessarily the debt, but it's also about, are these the type of assets that could create and generate economic activity, for example, so that we can begin to do that which may create 2 or 3 jobs, even more for that matter, in certain places. But the reality is that these assets are not even under anybody's control, among others.
Okay, no, spot on.
And for me, that's how communities.
Look, an hour has flown by. It's been extremely interesting discussion, and I just want to thank you both for joining us and for all the viewers out there. And just to wrap up by saying that it is an extremely dire situation that our municipalities are in. Some of them are collapsed. The public are suffering. No water, as you say, electricity, refuse removal. This shouldn't be. This doesn't have to be the case. It is not the case in a number of municipalities. And we've got to work together. Government, we believe, should start seeing its citizens as partners in this. Citizens should start exercising their rights. We must take this seriously. We can get out of this mess without a doubt. But what we do need to do is to do something about it. We need our authorities to stop turning a blind eye, to get focused on what the real issues are, to hold people to account. I think it's the big issue to build this level of trust. As you said, Kemi, there's this breakdown of trust, and it's in so many areas of government, and become customer or citizen-centric as local government, and for citizens to exercise their rights and powers. And we've got a long journey to go. I think this is going to be the first of a number of series on this and other exciting topics. So again, once again, thank you so much, AG and Dr. Ledger for joining us today on this really interesting topic. We're going to share the slides. I believe they didn't come up on the screen, but I spoke to them. They're serious issues, and I think go and read the AG's report. It is mind-blowing. It is very telling. Read the PARI reports and the research that they put out there. We've got a lot of work to do as citizens. Let's do it together. And please, government authorities, see your citizens as part of the solution, not as part of the problem. Thank you all for your time. Thanks again, AG. Thanks again, Tracy. And we will see you again soon. All the best.
Thanks very much, Wayne. Thank you.